What's up, everybody? Hopefully you guys are doing good as always. Today we have a recap for a Pogchamps 3 game. This is one of the most exciting games of Pogchamps 3. It's between Ludwig and MrBeast, and one of the reasons it's so exciting is because there's a $10,000 bet on this game. The loser must give $10,000 to the winner, so let's go ahead and jump straight in. In the first game, Ludwig started with the white pieces. He goes for e4, and we have d5, the Scandinavian defense. And with the Scandi, it's very important if you're playing it to focus on developing your pieces, because often, and I've showed this line before, often what happens is that your queen is the only piece that gets developed, and even for the exchange of one pawn, in the end, the queen's the only developed piece, whereas white manages to develop many of their pieces, and white is actually better here. And so it's important to realize that if you get your queen out so early, you need to tuck it away somewhere safe, for example on a5, and then focus on developing the rest of your pieces, which is exactly what MrBeast does here. He takes out his knight, then his bishop, and he's playing this very well, and then he castles very quickly. So far, MrBeast playing the opening very nicely. One thing I will touch, this a3 move is very unnecessary, and it's actually a bit of a bad move, because the idea was stopping this knight from coming here and attacking the c2 pawn, but there's a couple of problems with this move. First of all, it doesn't really even stop it, because in the case of the knight coming to b4, after takes, the queen can simply take the rook. This pawn is pinned here on a3, so it doesn't even really stop this attack. But also, one of the reasons that attacks are so they're so not powerful in the opening is because white has so many pieces near their king to defend from all of the attacks. So even if the knight manages to come here, it's such an easy attack to defend from. For example, even just d3, shutting out this bishop is a perfect way to defend from this attack. So it's important to realize when are attacks necessary that I need to actually defend from them, and when is it just unnecessary to play a move like a3 here. Regardless, black castles, and now we see d3 anyways, shutting out the bishop, getting ready to develop the dark square bishop, and it's very also interesting to see this very passive setup, specifically looking at the bishops, both bishops on d2 and e2, and although there are still chances to attack with this bishop, looking at this x-ray towards the queen, it is a relatively passive setup that white has chosen here, whereas black is trying to control more of the center and gain more space in the center of the board. Here we have knight coming to f6 and immediately knight to e4, using this discovery on the queen. And this, I think, was kind of a test that Ludwig set towards MrBeast, because, the idea of this actual move is not so powerful, but it's more to see, will he notice that his queen's attacked? And MrBeast does notice it. He moves his queen towards the center, centralizes it. A great move here. And even though it looks like this structure might be very bad for black, especially because black castled on the queen side, this structure on the king side is it doesn't really matter when it comes to the safety of the king. And also, once white castles, and white probably will castle on the queen side, on the king side, this open file is actually something that black will be able to use to their advantage. And so that's exactly what happened in the game. After this exchange, white castled and the rook came onto g8. There's already some threats only because of this open file that has been made. For example, if white does nothing here, then suddenly there's idea of bishop to h3. And the idea with this move is to x-ray this rook. Obviously, the pawn can't take, and so the pawn has to move up. Otherwise, this rook will be able to take here, and then you're going to win the rook. And so there's already some ideas to attack, which is why g3 was played here. It's why g3 was played here, stopping any attacks. And now if the bishop comes here, although it's still a good move, the rook has the time to move before it is taken. So here we have e4, and now we have c5 counterattacking, c4 counterattacking the queen, and bishop to e3, attacking the queen again. So far, MrBeast has played this very well. It's just important to realize the queen's attacked. You have many ways to move it to safety. For example, just moving it to e7 should be completely fine here. But he decides to take the bishop, and I assume this is because he didn't realize that the pawn here was defending the bishop. I assume that's why he decided to take the bishop. But regardless, he's in a horrible position now, and really the rest of the game continued going downhill. Ludwig converting quite nicely here. He decides to go for the sacrifice here, but he's up a queen, so it's completely fine. He takes the knight here. The bishop takes the pawn. This might seem okay because it seems like an intermediate move. Instead of immediately taking the bishop back, first you take here with an attack. But the issue is there's a pretty cool move here. Queen to b1. If you take the rook, then there's checkmate. And so Ludwig found this really cool idea, queen to b1. So the rook came to d6 for some reason, not taking the bishop. You could have easily just taken, and although you're completely worse here, it's still a fight. But he decides to give away the bishop, and I mean, Ludwig can easily convert this. He actually converts it very nicely, gets this fork, and here MrBeast resigns. So a really exciting first game. It was really, really well played by both players up until this point where MrBeast gave away his queen. So I think in game 2, both players have chances to win. Ludwig is a little bit more experienced, so he managed to convert that winning position very easily. But let's go ahead and dive straight into game number 2. So for game 2, MrBeast has the white pieces, and we have d4, d5, and now c4, and knight to f6. Now, in the queen's gambit, if you're going for the decline variation, typically you want to decline with a move like e6, because knight to f6, although it doesn't blunder material, it is a slight inaccuracy, because after takes, your knight is in the center of the board, which means that e4 is possible, kicking the knight away, and suddenly white has a massive control in the center. And so it would have been slightly better going with e6 here, but regardless, the game continues. And here black makes another slight inaccuracy. So maybe black in this position, or Ludwig is not used to playing against this d4 opening as much, because both of these knight moves were a little bit inaccurate. And the reason that this one is not so good is because typically when you're faced against d4, you want to use your c-pawn to try to kind of attack this d-pawn and try to chip away at the center that white has built. And so often what that means is playing a move like e6 and then going for c5 defended by the bishop, and after you push your c5 pawn, then you play your knight after that behind the pawn, and so you still get that development, but only, you have a bit better control at the center. So that would have been probably a little bit better, but regardless, this is what happened in the game. And now a3 was played. I think MrBeast was trying to stop any ideas like these, but again, in the opening, you shouldn't really worry about stopping attacks from your opponent, but just because they're so, it's such a rare case where an attack in the opening is actually going to pay out successfully, and usually you're going to have so many ways to stop an attack, even if they get close to actually doing it. So I don't think that a3 was necessarily necessary here. Regardless, the game continues, both players developing, and now we see some trades in the center of the board, and immediately black gives away this pawn. I don't know if it was on purpose, because this could have been on purpose, because although it is giving away a pawn, notice that then the rook gets control of this file, and you might win the pawn back here, or some lines you might even give the pawn for free, but in the end you're going to have a great attack here on this king side of the board. And if you open up this g-file, that might work in your favor, and you might be able to attack this king very early on. So Ludwig chose a very aggressive attacking idea here, and it actually ended up paying off, because he gets this very beautiful queen h4 move, and g3 seems to be very good, but simply bishop takes g3 was played, a very beautiful move. If you take, you drop your rook, there's that pin idea, and already, I mean, Ludwig is doing much better here. And it all came from that idea of giving away a pawn here, but in return opening up this king side a lot, and being able to use all of your pieces on the king side to attack this king here. So a really convincing attack here, a really nice attack here by Ludwig. And in the end, he's up material, he takes some of these pawns, and he performs a beautiful check here. This is a really cool idea. He pre-moved rook takes bishop because he knew that was the only move. He took the queen, and of course this is just game over. He takes the rook and does a checkmate. So a really beautiful performance here by Ludwig, attacking very nicely. And you have to be careful about opening up your king if you're not castled yet. And although, opening up this file does open up black's king too, notice that in the end of this, white king is the one that's being attacked, because white doesn't have as much power and as much pieces to attack powerfully against this king, whereas black has all of these pieces lined up in the king side, which is why opening up the king side ended up working towards black, ended up working in black's favor. So overall, Ludwig wins both games. They weren't easy games. MrBeast played very well in both of them. He just made some blunders at some point, and that is how the game ends. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Leave down below what you thought of the result, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.